Welcome to 2022. I'm glad you decided to join us. So why don't you pull up a chair, sit down, grab something to drink, and let's talk New Year's resolutions. One of the greatest challenges I face as a pastor is dealing with the fact that the world has taken some of the key words or concepts of our faith and sort of co-opted them by either assigning them a new meaning or taking the original meaning and watering it down a bit. And today's word, epiphany, is a great example of that. For you see, the word epiphany with a capital E was first used to mean, and I quote from my good friend Dr. Webster of the dictionary fame, a Christian festival observed on January 6th, commemorating the manifestation of Christ to the Gentiles in the persons of the Magi. Now, Epiphany was one of just 7 principal feasts of the Christian tradition. And in some parts of the world, Epiphany was so important that it outshone even Christmas. Well, over time, the world took that very specific meaning and broadened it considerably. And so today, most people know the word Epiphany with a small e to mean simply, and again, I quote my friend Dr. Webster, a sudden intuitive perception of or insight into the reality or essential meaning of something. Now, it would be easy for me to complain about how the world has corrupted the meaning of that extraordinary event through its broadening of the term, but I don't want to do that today. The world has enough complaining as it is. No, today I want to do almost the opposite of that. I want to take the original concept of epiphany with a capital E and see how we might use it to find manifestations of that Christ child, not just in Bethlehem, but in all the somethings of our daily lives. So listen today as I read the story of that first epiphany. And when I finish, why don't we come back together and see how that story could be used to help us discover those manifestations. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, is read from the Common English Bible. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in the territory of Judea, during the rule of King Herod, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. They ask, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We've seen his star in the east, and we've come to honor him." Now, when King Herod heard this, he was troubled, and everyone in Jerusalem was troubled with him. Herod gathered all the chief priests and the legal experts and asked them where this Christ was to be born. They said, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what the prophet wrote. You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are you least among the rulers of Judah, because from you will come one who governs, who will shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and found out from them the time when the star had first appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search carefully for this child, and when you found him, report to me, so that I too may go and honor him." When they heard the king, they went, and look, the star that they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house, and they saw the child with Mary, his mother. And falling to their knees, they honored him. Then they opened their treasure chests and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And because they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went back to their own country by another route. And thus ends the sacred story. Because of that old famous Christmas song, "We Three Kings," written by John Henry Hopkins Jr. back in the year 1857, most folks have a lot of misconceptions about that first Epiphany. First, that song created the belief that there were only 3 magi. Truth is, we don't know how many there really were. And second, it reinforced the belief that those travelers were kings. Truth is, they were not. They were more of what today we might call astrologers. And even you and I can perpetuate some of those misconceptions through the simple things we do, like how we put out our nativity scenes. We perpetuate it through the display of our nativity scenes many times because we often put out the shepherds and the magi together in recreating that first Christmas. But the truth is, the magi would have come along well after the shepherds had gone. So with all of these misconceptions floating around out there, it can be a challenge to know what pieces of the story to hold on to and what pieces to let go of, to figure out for ourselves what is of lasting value in that story. Well, in the way that I read it, there are at least 2 different things. The first of those has to do with how the story really came to define and expand the course of Jesus' ministry, especially for those who captured it in the telling of the Gospel of Matthew. For you see, the writers of Matthew's Gospel had primarily one goal in mind, and that was to present Jesus as the fulfillment of the Jewish scriptures and tradition. And yet, despite that very specific goal, the story of the Magi represents the first time in which Gentiles played a role in the story. And it was the first indicator of this story that Jesus would greatly expand this notion of who God's chosen or who God's beloved really were. So that's the first thing of lasting value. And how about the second? Well, the second has to do with how I started my time with you this morning. For the story does a wonderful job of inviting us to take both the secular definition of epiphany, or a sudden intuitive perception of something, and using that in a faith-based context to begin to give us a glimpse of the divine in our everyday lives. For you see, in pulling both the secular and sacred definitions together, author, movie producer, and researcher Elyse Ballard wrote in a book called Epiphany. Its subtitle was True Stories of Sudden Insight to Inspire, Encourage, and Transform. And in her book, Elyse identified 4 ingredients that all epiphanies have, starting with the first one with the Magi, all the way up to today. And for those of you out there listening who are prone to make New Year's resolutions, it might be helpful to steal those 4 components and use them as guides or resolutions for 2022. So let me take just a moment this morning and share those 4 things with you. Component number 1, all epiphany experiences involve listening. People who experience epiphanies, Elyse Ballard wrote, are listening and paying attention to what is going on around them. They are open to possibilities and the voice, be it internal or external, that directs us to them. Component number 2, all epiphanies involve belief. People who have epiphanies, Ballard wrote, believe without a doubt that it is real and that it can or does apply directly to them, and they are not dissuaded by skeptics around them. Component number 3, all epiphanies involve action. Every person whose life is changed by an epiphany. Elise Ballard noted, acted on the epiphany soon after they received it. They took a first step, often without even knowing what the second step would be. And finally, component number 4. Epiphanies involve what she called serendipity. Once these folks took action, Ballard noted, things seemed to fall into place, which made the second, the third, and further steps both obvious and possible. Some called it the hand of God, others providence, still others karma or what have you, but luck, she noted, always seemed to turn in their favor after they acted on the epiphany. And those, my friends, are 4 keys to transformation in the year ahead: listening, believing, acting, and embracing serendipity. Let me say them one last time: listening, believing, acting, and embracing serendipity. Those things worked and were true for the Magi, and those things can work and be true for you and I in this new year as well. So my hope in closing is that each of us might let go of the misconceptions that have grown out of the story of the Magi, and instead grab onto and hold those bedrock 4 principles that, like the star, guided the Magi through their epiphany. For in these early days of the new year, if each of us resolve to first listen, then believe, then act, and finally embrace serendipity, we could have a year full of epiphanies, a year full of moments when we get a glimpse of the divine in the everyday somethings that fill our days. May it be so, and have a blessed 2022.